Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to go through how I made this little one. Her name is Sinus, the albino Tasmanian tiger. She's got a resin head, a ball and socket armature, and is made from faux fur. So she's available in my shop if she already hasn't been snapped up or purchased prior by my patrons. So yeah, my shop is at creaturesofnat.com, and if you want to see how I made her, then just keep watching. Alright, so starting off with a resin cast of a sculpture. This is a new sculpt that I've recently done. It was originally a commission for another Tasmanian tiger. It's smaller than the previous version that I did. And yes, so this is a new sculpt. So what I'm doing is I decided to make an albino version because I've never seen one before. I don't know if it ever existed, but let's make it. So I'm just painting around the eyes, the nose and the mouth in a sort of a pastely pink colour. I'm using a paint called Derivian Matisse, and it is just water-based acrylic paint. You can find any sort of water-based acrylic paint. Always prime your resin before you paint it, because it can actually chip off pretty easily, because resin's a little bit slippery. So I tend to prime mine with a canvas primer. I have a video on my channel if you want to know exactly which one that I use. And I'm painting inside the ears as well, just pretty roughly because it's going to be covered in faux fur, so no need to be too particular about the way you're painting things. For the eyes, these eyes are going to be painted, and they're just going to be plain red for this one, no pupil or anything. So I'm using a paint called Chromacryl in the colour Cool Red, and I really like this colour. It's more of a bluey toned red, but it's a really nice deep looking red, and I'm just being a little bit more careful around the eyes not to go outside of the edges, and I apply a couple of coats of this paint because it is a little bit thin. So yes, this one needs a couple of paints, but it just depends how thin or thick your paint is to apply how many coats. And this one I'll be using some varnish to make it glossy. Same deal with the feet. It's a brand new sculpt of feet as well, and I have cast a resin ball and socket armature inside of it. I have 2 videos available, one's free and one is on my Patreon about ball and socket armatures, so you can check that out if you are interested. And I'm just again painting the bottom with that same pink paint that I painted the face with. This is a really nice paint. It's a really good base for other paint colours as well, other pink colours as well, so if you can get your hands on it, I'd recommend it. It's nice consistency, and there's no like pigment separation or anything that I've come across so far. So yeah, just quickly doing some paint work, and the rest you don't have to be, again, don't be too particular about it because I ended up covering it with faux fur anyway, and I usually give this a couple of coats of paint as well. Moving on to the faux fur, so this little pattern I made using an older pattern of, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I thought it was a really good body to use for the Tasmanian tiger, so I'm just drawing out some of the patterns. I have a video on my Patreon about patterns as well if you're interested in that, and then I'll end up cutting it out using a small pair of sharp scissors, and just be mindful of what sort of texture or colour you use, because sometimes you can have some bleed through on white fabrics. So this is a little look at what the fur looks like. It's pretty much a standard fur that I use a lot for my white furs. And then yeah, like I said before, cutting it out with a small pair of sharp scissors, just being careful to insert the blades in between the pile, and cutting the backing instead of the actual the pile. Otherwise it will just end up short and kind of useless. So once these are cut, I can pin them together and sew them up on a sewing machine. You can sew them by hand if you don't have a sewing machine. It just take a bit longer, or you can do it a multitude of other different ways. This is just the way that I do it. And this is what we have after I've sewed it up. as you can see, it needs to be turned the right way around, so I've left the back end open and also the leg area open, and that way I can easily push it through. So once it's been pushed through, sometimes it's an eternal struggle, but sometimes it's pretty easy, depending on how big the holes you leave will be, how quick you can turn it the right way around, or how big your doll is. Again, you can hand sew things, so you don't have to do this step. You could just sew it together using a ladder stitch, which I've done before for certain dolls, like the gorilla doll. But yeah, once that's done, I can then go and make the armature. So sometimes I make a ball and socket armature, and sometimes I make a wire armature. This one has a ball and socket armature, and I've inserted it into the faux fur, and then you can start gluing and sewing. So I use a tacky fabric glue to stick all of my fabric pieces to the resin, and you just want to apply it liberally inside of the fabric, and then just being careful not to squeeze it out or squeeze it through to the other side of the fur. Sometimes it can leak through, so you don't want to apply too much, but you don't want to apply too little. That way it sort of ruins the pile if it's too much, and if it's not enough, it obviously doesn't stick. So once that's done, I can start sewing everything up. I use a ladder stitch, and you want to get yourself a good quality thread to make sure it doesn't snap when you're sewing. And then I also apply some of that glue onto the bottom and stick that fabric onto the resin. And for the filling, I use polyfill, which is sort of the same thing that you find in pillows, like cushions or something. And you can get that from your local craft store as well, or online. I'm sure you can find it online somewhere. And once I glue things, I usually leave it to dry for at least a couple of hours, preferably overnight, just so it adheres properly and it really sticks to the resin, and there's no chance of it actually coming off. So I always leave it. Quick pat for the cats while sewing. Always good to procrastinate, right? Yes, so once that's done, I can start sewing everything up. The last thing I sew is usually the tail onto the body, making sure that I am filling it with polyfill during the process as well. So this is what it looks like once it's been sewn up. It doesn't really look like anything, just a big fluff. So I'll give it a nice trim, make sure none of the pile's been sewn down, and this is what it looks like once it's been given a nice trim. I have a trimming video on my Patreon as well if you want to know how I do that. So time to fur the face with this. So I use the same fur for the body and give it a little bit of a trim and also do the paws as well. And then once that's done, I usually leave that to dry overnight again, and you can see how it poses so far. And then I just add some paint into all of the little details that got covered by some of the fur, and I pick out anything that I don't like as well, and just give it a good brush. Just to refine things a bit more. For the stripes, I'm going to be doing a full video over on my Patreon on doing these stripes. So if you want to know, you can join for $5 and up and find out how I did it. For the whiskers, I have a tutorial in my shop if you want to know how and what I used for the whiskers as well. So this little one is available to my patrons for early access. If not, she'll be in my shop ready to go to a new home. Well, I guess she'll hang around the airport here a little bit because there's a pretty big delay in packages. But anyway, my shop is a link in the description at creaturesofnat.com. My Patreon is also in the description if you are interested in joining, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my patrons, really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!